But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today, traumatized with shameful conditions.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? What's going on, world? Thanks for tuning in again. This is the one and only, the original. Please make sure to like and subscribe. Today's video is called Disturbing Truth, Martin Luther King's Death. Credit is due to the great William F. Pepper and all that contributed. All are greatly appreciated. Let's get it. Now, considering how the government and the public education system lied and continues to lie about Martin Luther King's true death, I felt that it was only right and necessary to do my next video concerning this truth of Martin Luther King's death. Now, the majority of us were all taught that the cause of Martin Luther King's death was an assassination. An assassin by the name of James Earl Ray that supposedly fired a single shot that caused severe wounds to the lower right side of his face, which took place on the balcony at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. Today's video, I will be showing you how this was a false narrative concerning Martin Luther King's death and how Martin Luther King Jr. really died. Now, many of us were taught that he was assassinated, but the truth is he survived the shot. And that was not the cause of his death. So who is William F. Pepper? When the dust had settled, King had been shot and a cleanup operation was in motion. James Earl Ray was framed. The crime scene was destroyed and witnesses were killed. It will take William F. Pepper, attorney and friend of King, 30 years to get to the bottom of a conspiracy that changed the course of American history. In 1999, the King family, represented by the author, brought a civil action lawsuit against Lloyd Jowers and other co-conspirators. 70 witnesses set out the details of a plot that involved J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, Richard Helms and the CIA, the U.S. military, the Memphis police, and organized crime. The jury took an hour to find for the King family. Now 50 years after MLK's execution, an act of state demonstrates the bloody depths to which the U.S. government will descend to repress a movement for change. So who was William F. Pepper? Not only was he an attorney for the King family, he was a good friend of the King family and spent 30 years of his life fighting for the family and fighting for the justice they deserve. William F. Pepper also wrote several books about the truth behind Martin Luther King's death. The Plot to Kill King, An Act of State, Who Really Killed Martin Luther King Jr., and Orders to Kill, The Truth Behind the Murder of Martin Luther King. Notice in the book, Who Really Killed Martin Luther King Jr., there were some really big names that were involved in this murder and the framing of James Earl Ray. President Lyndon B. Johnson and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover were also involved. What we're looking at here is the court case in the matter of Coretta Scott King versus Lloyd Jowers. Now, this is a pretty big case. I could be talking for hours about it, but I don't have that much time, so I'm going to go ahead and get to the main point of the topic. So on this part of the case, Mr. Pepper is doing an examination on Johnson Terrence Shelby, which is the son of the deceased witness, Lola Mae Shelby, and her maiden name was Price. During this time of the case, when Johnson Terrence Shelby was being examined by Mr. Pepper, he was permanently blind. But during the time of Martin Luther King's assassination, he was not. He was a young boy around the age of 9. His mother, Lola Mae Shelby, her maiden name, Lola Mae Price, was the actual witness of Martin Luther King's death. She worked as a surgical aide at St. Joseph's Hospital, the same hospital Martin Luther King was transported to after he was shot in the face. The night Martin Luther King was shot, Lola Mae Price called home to speak with Terrence's older brother, and she said she won't be home. She got to stay. They won't let her come home. Everybody that was on that shift that night had to stay overnight. That was it. No more phone calls. The next morning around 11 o'clock, when Lola Mae Price arrived home, she gathered her family and sat down in the front room and told them she had to tell them something. She said, "They killed him." She just kept saying, "They killed him." She said it was low down and dirty. She said she couldn't believe they was that low down and how they mistreated him. During the time of the examination, Mr. Pepper asked Terrence, how did she describe what went on, the mistreatment, and what they did? What did she say? Well, they had brought him in. There was this gurney, I guess a gurney, and she said there was blood all over. She was talking about how this side of his face from here, his chin, bottom chin, and part of his neck, and the shoulder, part of that was just blown away. She said they went to working on him and said somebody was saying they found a slight pulse. And that's when the man walked in the door and said, "Everybody stop working. I mean, you all stop. Let that nigger die." During the examination, Mr. Pepper asked Terrence, "So somebody walked in the room? Was that Dr. Breen Bland?" Terrence replied, "She didn't call no name. She just said it was the head of surgery. She knew that person." Yes, the head of surgery said, "Stop working on that nigger and let him die." Mr. Pepper asked Terrence, "And who was with him?" Terrence responded, when he walked in there was 2 guys with suits on. I can't tell you what color because she didn't say what color suits they had on. She said state troopers came in there with their rifles and there was 2 outside. Mr. Pepper asked Terrence, "So 2 state troopers came in with rifles after the head of surgery said, 'Stop working on that nigger and let him die'? What did he say after that? What happened after that?" Terrence responded, "The head of surgery ordered everyone to get out and threw everyone out." Terrence's mother, Lola Mae Price, the witness, was also one of the people who had to get out, one of the last people to hit that door. Mr. Pepper asked Terrence, one of the last people, what did she hear or notice as she was leaving? Terrence responded, hawking, like getting ready to spit. Chew. She looked back and saw them spit. She didn't see them pull the air tube out. She heard it. She saw them spit. The first guy spit. That's when she heard them hawking, and the other guy spit. Mr. Pepper asked, "They were spitting on the body?" Terrence responded, "Yes." Mr. Pepper asked, "And the breathing tube had been removed?" Terrence responded, "Yes, because that's when she heard the sound of it being removed." Mr. Pepper asked, "What then did she see after that?" Terrence responded, "The pillow. The guy picked up the pillow and went over his head just like that." Mr. Pepper asked, "The head of surgery?" Terrence responded, "Just held. Put it over his head, over his face." Mr. Pepper asked, "To block his breathing?" Terrence responded, "Yes." Mr. Pepper asked, "Did she say how long the pillow was there, or was she just then?" Terrence responded, "She was walking on out the door." Mr. Pepper, "She was walking out the door when she saw this?" Terrence responded, "Yeah. Yes. The more I think about it now, I think she got away with it because they was killing a man. So everybody's attention was on what he was doing, including the people with the guns. They wasn't looking at her, so she slowed down as she was going out." Mr. Pepper asked, "She slowed down and sort of looked back, did she?" Terrence responded, Yes. Mr. Pepper, right. So the people, they were concentrating on killing the man." Terrence responded, "Yes." Mr. Pepper, right. Okay, so she was outside. Did she say she saw many military people around in uniform outside? Terrence, "She saw in the hall," she said, "2 guys outside the door, 2 military, I guess, National Guard. She saw a lot of police. There was a lot of them outside, but they didn't let them out. They told them they couldn't leave to go wherever they was going. Whatever room they sent them to, they had to stay." Mr. Pepper, "In the hospital?" Terrence, "Yes." Now these next couple of pages, we're going to briefly explain what's being talked about. On this part of the case, as you can see, the people that were at the hospital and everyone that worked at the hospital were all told not to say a word. Some of the people's jobs were even threatened if they were to speak of what they had witnessed or heard at the hospital. This part of the case, they're trying to figure out if anyone else knew about the death of Martin Luther King and if the witness had told anyone else about it. You're going to see an individual that goes by the name of Mr. Garrison. He also did an examination on Terrence, confirming everything Terrence had mentioned about Martin Luther King's death was true. On this last part of the case, they were trying to figure out if any of the doctors had ever acknowledged the incident that took place at the hospital, or if any of the doctors had ever been confronted about the incident that took place. We have now reached the end of the video. If you are still watching, that means you now know the untold truth of Martin Luther King's death. Thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. Please make sure to like and subscribe. This is the one and only, the original.